Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey everybody, it's Debbie Potts, and I'm doing another episode with Dr. Elena on a new topic today for the Whole Athlete Podcast. And don't forget that you can find us also video on YouTube, the Whole Athlete Podcast channel, and see us as we talk today. So you can listen on audio, but video, you can see us chat together in person. So thanks for coming back, Elena. We did a podcast last month, or a couple months ago, on healthy fats, which is, to me, is always a big topic. And you're a naturopath in Bellevue near me. And talk a little bit what you do in your practice. What do you focus on?
Yes, thank you, Debbie, so much. And I'm so excited to be back on your podcast. I think it's absolutely wonderful, everything that you're doing. But my practice is in Bellevue. I'm the co-founder of Proactive Health, a naturopathic clinic. And my focus is mainly women's health, digestive health, nutrition, and absolutely, of course, important. One of the most important ones is hormone health. I definitely believe in patient, first and foremost, education, empowering through knowledge so that we can make better decisions. And it's interesting that we'll talk about fats, right, and how it relates to fasting, kind of how to get into your optimal state today. But just the importance of fats, I feel like we can always talk about fats, more fats, with every topic that we discuss. So thanks for having me. I'm excited for today's topic.
Yeah, talk about kind of why do you think we need to specialize in women's health and hormones?
Oh gosh.
What brought you into that niche?
That is such a big topic. Originally my practice focused mostly on offering really unique pain management therapies, but I had, given my experience in women's health, I had a lot of women coming to me just with trouble losing weight, where diet and exercise was not working. So we kind of had to dig further about what is the issue, what is the underlying root cause behind, trouble sleeping, trouble losing weight, trouble with energy, because, some of the things that I talk about is that like weight loss is a secondary component of everything that we do, because when we fix our gut health, hormone health, everything kind of settles in and weight loss becomes more of a natural part of the process. But, one of the reasons I really got into women's health is because women's health is complicated.
Yeah.
Especially when we get into hormones. But there are just many natural ways and many alternative ways that we can help women be healthy, that we can help women be successful business owners, be, great parents, juggle busy work schedules. And, hormone imbalances are very common in women. 90% of my clients are women, and more and more men are starting to show up thinking about things like testosterone and thyroid. They're not an exception to the hormone imbalance rule. So I think it's just a really important topic, and just we need a lot more focus on alternative ways to help people manage their hormones.
Good. Well, and that kind of ties into what we're talking today about is fasting. And when is fasting, intermittent fasting, good for you? When is it not? And I just finished reading an excellent book, Dr. Jason Fung, The Complete Guide to Fasting to Heal Your Body Through Intermittent, Alternate Day, and Extended Fasting. And Dr. Jason Fung worked with type 2 diabetes and started researching. And I love the book. It's very easy read too, because I'm always tired at night, but I try to read 3 pages of any book per bedtime. And Jimmy Moore was a co-author in here in the beginning. And I find it really interesting because, as I shared, My Life is Not a Race book and my Holistic Method Manual, there's, I've experimented with fasting, and different types of intermittent fasting overnight is pretty easy to do.
Right.
And when you're adrenally fatigued or hormone imbalance for women, there is some, guidelines that's not so great for people if you're causing another stress on your body. Is fasting is good for you, and is fasting good to shift from being, if you're type 2 diabetic or insulin resistance, or you're addicted to carbohydrates, when is it good? So talk about what fasting is for you and how you use it into your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely pros and cons to fasting. And one of the things that you brought up is that it may be appropriate for some people and may not be appropriate for others. And there's a spectrum of fasting, right? What I have seen in just the culture and the mainstream media, shift away from, for example, traditionally fasting as we know it, which is like liquid fasting, right? Which is you're just drinking like juice or water. And I'm seeing more shift toward that intermittent fasting where you're fasting for 16 hours, a few hours longer than a traditional like 8-hour fast where you're,
sleeping,
sleeping essentially. So you're kind of pushing your body to fast a little bit further. And so you're only eating with intermittent fasting. You have an 8-hour window when you're getting most of your fuel. So you're trying to cram it all in. And so I'm very strategic about the people that I use fasting with or that I do fasting with. And the reason being is that, I'll kind of tie in adrenal fatigue as I talk about this is because it's not appropriate for certain individuals. But one of the things that I like about intermittent fasting, where you are fasting for 16 hours and then eating for 8 hours, is that it can help balance hormones, especially hormones that are related to muscle repair, muscle build lean muscle mass, like growth hormone. Mm-hmm. It can help regulate blood sugar. So for type 2 diabetes, especially the relationship between insulin and blood sugar. And then, it can also help regulate mood. It can help to shift the body toward more fat metabolism. It doesn't necessarily, the thing with fasting is that, your body will first and foremost use glycogen as source for fuel. Like a building block for carbohydrates, it's really easy to use it for fuel. But then, it's not going to go straight to fat. It's going to start to break down protein, which is a lot easier to break down than fat. And then during certain fasting stages, we'll go for the fat deposits. However, you're still the body will make fat more readily available during a fasting stage, which is why it is useful to include intermittent fasting when you're trying to lose weight. And the way that I incorporate fasting into my clients' schedules is that I don't say that they need to do it every single day. Intermittent fasting, it can be done once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week. There are individuals, some of my, hardcore athletes, they are fine doing it even every single day. And we'll kind of get into fasting and exercise, right, in a little bit. But it's very individual about the frequency with which you want to do it. The caution that I have with some individuals is that, in my specialty, because I do focus on hormone health and women's health, and because I do see a lot of adrenal fatigued people coming in who are kind of burning the candle from both ends, I don't recommend intermittent fasting initially as a first line. I don't recommend it as part of treatment plan. So what I focus on is first getting what I focus on is getting the adrenals healthy first. We want to do some testing to see what cortisol levels are doing, if they're up and down, if they're all over the place. Because what happens if we try to do intermittent fasting where we're having people, fast for, beyond 8 hours, 12 to 16 hours, that can mess up their, initially when I say mess up their blood sugar, they're just going to be a lot more sensitive to that change in blood sugar, and what they can actually feel worse with that change. So we want to make sure that their adrenal glands are healthy, that they're not going to overproduce the amounts of cortisol to compensate for the fasting, and that they don't experience such a dip and drop in blood sugar when they're fasting. And, back to our podcast, if you didn't listen to Debbie and I talking about fats, become more efficient fat metabolizer. So we want to change their diet first and then introduce intermittent fasting in the next phase. So that's how I use it in my practice.
Good. And I think that's an important part of what I've been doing too is teaching people how to burn fat. And that's what my tagline is: to burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance. But how do you get the body to burn fat? So I think a lot of times the way we've been trained and misled the last 50 years plus since Ansel Keys started the whole cholesterol saturated fat fear for everybody that you're going to get heart disease and die if you have coconut oil, that I think, we were raised not to have fat. And so we've had my book, Life is Not a Race, some reason I went back in time and what looked like how I got my adrenal exhaustion stuff, or HPA axis is technical term, your hypothalamus to pituitary gland to over is stimulating that adrenals from that constant stress inside and or outside your body. But I think it's why we are not burning fat, because we're eating so many carbohydrates, and we've talked about many times, but it's how do you get that shift from being a carb burner? And I went back in time and I realized, I just was writing a blog on my website about how I first started thinking about this is when I started training for Ironman's 2001. So it was back like in 2000 when I started doing long bike rides, Seattle to Portland, organized rides, 200 miles in a day. And I was training. I remember the exact day. I taught spin class at the club, and I
was probably in that spin class.
Yeah. Well, it's probably, I'm a little older than you. So Bellevue Club, back in forever ago, I taught spin class on a Saturday morning, and I was meeting people to do a long bike ride. And I started going, well, I have fat to lose on my body. How am I going to burn fat off if I'm supposed to eat a Cliff Bar, banana, and orange juice, and then go have a bike ride and eat every hour? And that's when I started going, that makes no sense. Why am I supposed to eat 300 to 500 calories every hour to keep fueled for my long bike ride and lose weight? And because I was a little heavier and wanted to lose weight, and I couldn't figure out how. And so that's when I started thinking about all this. And that, as I look back, that was kind of my way of finding out metabolic efficiency, but fasting. So what if I just don't eat? So I tried that. But it doesn't work if you are a carb burner and you just stop. Like, I'm not going to eat after spin class. I'm going to go ride 3 hours and see how I do. Well, I bonked. I totally remember sitting on the side of the road, Enumclaw Fairgrounds, not being able to ride. People had to go continue the ride, come back and get me. They gave me a Cliff Bar or something that has ridiculous, 50 grams of carbs in it. And I came back to life, and I rode strong all the way back to the car. Yeah. That was 20 years ago, probably 18 years ago. And that's when I started being curious. Sadly, I didn't write a book early on about that. But point is that to shift from being what we gotten ourselves into being sugar burners, because we eat this high carbohydrate diet, and we should be burning fat. Sitting here when I go for a lower heart rate workout using, the Maffetone heart rate, we've talked about the max aerobic function. When I'm doing this, I shouldn't have to eat so much. So long story short, how do we get to be burning fat? Well, we have this transition period we need to figure out how to do. And so instead of just, I'm not going to eat right away, we have to kind of, like you said earlier, build up the body and kind of reset and recalibrate our metabolism in a way. So you do a program, and I do a program too as well at my studio and with clients. How do you get people to shift from a sugar burner to a fat burner?
Yeah. Well, I think phase one is first we got to change the quality of calories that people are consuming, and we kind of talked about this in that other podcast, is that, carbohydrates come in different shapes and sizes and from different sources. And so first we're shifting our understanding of what is a carbohydrate, what is a healthy carbohydrate, what is a slower digesting carbohydrate. And then we have to introduce more quality protein and fat into the diet. So fasting is, I would say, like a second phase component, which is where the body then becomes a more efficient metabolizer of good quality carbohydrates like leafy greens, root vegetables. And when I do a sugar cleanse, I don't recommend root vegetables just because they're higher starch and higher sugar. So that's the only time when I don't recommend root vegetables as a good source of carbohydrates, when I'm trying to break people's like sugar addiction and trying to regulate insulin levels. However, once we have people just fueling more optimally, we start to introduce this intermittent fasting several times during the week to give the body a break, so that we're not constantly bombarding ourselves with food with 4 to 6 meals a day. Because what happens is that, again, kind of I mentioned how the body will go after glycogen first and then after protein. However, when you are doing an intermittent fast, when you're going past the 8 to 12 hours of not taking in any calories, your body will become more efficient fat metabolizer. The body will make it more readily available for you to use and to burn. And one of the things that I like to include is I want to make sure that people are also taking in good supplements that are high in B vitamins, magnesium, CoQ10, D-ribose, and all of those things. Those nutrients are really important for the mitochondria health, because when your mitochondria, which is the ATP, the energy producing organ of a cell, when it is functioning optimally, then we become more efficient fat metabolizers. If you give the mitochondria the building blocks so it can break down fat more efficiently, you're going to be able to break down more fat. So the other thing that I was going to say, actually, talking about cellular health and also fasting, is that fasting is a really important component of health. And the reason being is because your cells are constantly working and taking things in, but also pushing things out. So fasting becomes a really important component to actually waste removal and toxin removal. So, the more waste we can remove, the less oxidation happens in the body. And we can also increase longevity that way as well.
And that's what we talked a little bit in different podcasts I've had recently on detoxification, the lymphatic system, and using our rebounder, bouncing and using that part of a detox program that you're going into our infrared therapy treatment room, doing a session on detoxification. I've been adding like liver essential oil, the vibrant blue oils on the liver, and just trying to get those toxins out, because I think a lot of times it's that holistic method I call that you need to work on all these different elements. If you're really truly trying to draw those toxins out, fasting is helpful to how to get rid of eating all the toxic food and the processed foods and regulate the blood sugar, so we can start training the body to utilize fat stores for fuel. Exactly.
Yeah, precisely. And I think fasting is a very efficient way to actually remove toxins. I think fasting and sweating, right? So even the topic of today's conversation is fasting and exercise and how to do it optimally. And I actually kind of want to get into a little bit more of the exercise component as well. But our skin, we forget that skin is actually an organ. And so it's one of the biggest detoxing organs. So I know that you have an infrared sauna in your practice, and it's a great combination when you can fast and you can sweat, whether in the form of exercise or infrared sauna, which gives an added benefit. But, we release so much when we exercise just via breathing and the respiratory. Lungs is also a detoxification organ. We have lungs, we have our liver, we have our gut, and then skin. So here you have your top 4 organs that are involved in the detox pathways. Mm-hmm. And we'll make sure that we're involving all of them in the process. But, in regards to fasting and exercise, you talked about your Ironman career, and I work with a lot of, people who are looking to increase their performance. They're looking to lose fat, increase energy, improve their performance. They sign up for crazy races or, certain events that they want to perform at. And I work with some professional athletes as well. And so we're always talking about how do we incorporate intermittent fasting into a high intensity or high level of exercise during a training schedule, 7-day, 14-day, whatever the training schedule is. And kind of going back to the pros and cons of fasting and exercise, I believe that if you are fasting, if you are doing intermittent fasting, and if you have not eaten in 16 hours, that the level of intensity should be lower compared to the normal high level of intensity of exercise that you would do if you were not fasting. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that that higher intensity of exercise, whether it's lifting weights or endurance workouts or high cardio outputs, should be scheduled more during the day or during the time when you are incorporating meals. And the reason for that, it's multifold. First let's talk a little bit about what intensity means, because intensity is different for different folks, right? And we can include heart rate in that, and this is where maybe you can talk more. But I like to just gauge intensity based on breathing. And of course, as you become more, efficient in your workouts, your breathing will change and you'll be able to push yourself more, and you can engage what your breath is doing then. But, lower intensity of exercise when you're fasting means that you can have a conversation, but you're not like full on engaged. Like you can take a moment, talk a little bit, and then you're back in your activity. That would be like moderate level of intensity of exercise. And of course, higher level of intensity, you're fully engaged in what you're doing and nothing else matters. It's hard to keep up with any conversation. And so, but the reason being why I'm recommending that we do lower exercise intensity during the times that we're fasting is because, going back to that, your body will burn glycogen first and then protein second. And we want to make sure that, that we're not breaking down too much protein because we're fasting. And we want to make sure that the body's able to repair itself, because when we're losing muscle, we're also slowing our metabolic rate and our metabolism. And so that's why I recommend that lower intensity is not going to have as much of an impact on your metabolism as higher levels of intensity. So I'm definitely recommending that we kind of apply the concept of fueling before and after the high intensity levels of exercise to ensure that we're not crashing our metabolism and that we're facilitating good muscle repair and growth.
So even if you're not hungry and I don't feel like I need to eat, you still think people should eat before, during, and after a high intensity workout?
I think it's individual. Because everybody, everybody's cortisol, everybody's very unique in how their cortisol is regulated. Mm-hmm. I think it's good to pay attention to your hunger cues as well. And some people, in my case, I have a stomach of steel. And when I used to run, half a marathon to marathon distances, I could throw down a big meal and within 20 minutes go out and run and not feel a thing. However, I have a lot of athletes that I work with who have to wait 2 hours minimum before they do any sort of high level of intensity exercise. So I think it becomes individual. Mm-hmm. But what I do think is that when it depends on your performance goals as well. Body lifters' performance goals and performance indicators are going to be different than somebody who is a triathlete, for example, right? So it depends on what your goals are. Are your goals aesthetics? Are we trying to build muscle? Are we trying to get more lean? Or are we building endurance? So those are it depends on what you're looking for. And fueling will also depend on that as well.
Well, yes. And I think for endurance racing, for sure, and we do metabolic testing, and we're going to buy a new testing cart because New Leaf is what we used before was bought out. So I love doing metabolic testing card on people to see what fuel are you burning at rest as your primary fuel source. And you can measure the RQ value and find out, what percentage is fat and what's carbs. And then when you're exercising, and then I'll test people on the treadmill, or you can do the bike, and see what heart rate, where you're burning the most fat, where your metabolic efficiency point is, and the crossover point where you shift from fat to carbohydrates. And we can help extrapolate that and create their training program based on the metabolic testing, figure out where they're burning fat. But also we work on metabolic efficiency, what you're eating. So what ratio of fat, carbs, and proteins do you need to, what we said in previous podcasts, is to balance that blood sugar. Yes, I need higher fat, moderate protein, and lower carbs, but how much? Some people can tolerate more carbohydrates than others. And the goal is to still, I think, to stabilize the blood sugar and teach that body burn fat for fuel. So then once we get that body to shift to becoming a fat burner, I think it's easier to go into a workout fasted. And I find if I go for biking and you're bent over, if I just ate, it's not digesting. My food's still digesting. It doesn't feel good in your stomach when you're riding a bike. And I just finally got on my triathlon bike the other day, and it's especially not good to eat before going on a bike and being your aero bars, because the food's in your belly, so you're not digesting your food. So I actually personally, and I've shifted to be a fat burner over the years, and many years of fasting or doing a fat bulletproof coffee before I go for a long run or bike ride in the morning, or I don't eat anything before I wake up and go lift weights. So I think it's so individual. It depends, but I do better not eating very much, or just some nuts or macadamia nuts.
Exactly. And
have
I think
something, but you have to adapt to it is my point, is that you can't just shift like I did 20 years ago. Oh, I'm going to not eat anything after being an extremely high carbohydrate eater and see what happens.
Exactly. And I think you bring up an excellent point is that, and when I'm talking about even fueling prior to a workout, I'm not suggesting a big meal. I'm suggesting, just like you said, like a handful of nuts and maybe a few slices of an apple or something. I mean, you and I talked about that, like, I can't just have a piece of fruit, because when you're a carb burner, that may serve you better than once you're a fat metabolizer, or more efficient fat metabolizer. When you have an apple, you just like, I mean, I will bonk. And so I have to like put it together with some almond butter. I mean, you and I had this conversation, how important it is to, pair your carbohydrates with a healthy fat, because it's going to slow down the digestion. It's going to, balance your insulin and cortisol levels. And so, you bring up an excellent point, is that you don't just want to, eat a certain way, then quit that, and then not eat anything at all. You really want to be smart about it. And that's why I want to talk about kind of phase 1 and phase 2 is like, first, let's get you eating more optimally and fueling more optimally. And then let's start transitioning you more into becoming a more efficient fat metabolizer.
Yes.
And then start applying to that. I think then if I would add on a phase 3 is then starting to apply that to your workouts. I just think people get cut up. They kind of want this one thing fixes it all, and that, they've been eating for 20, 30 years a certain way, and all of a sudden they want to see the instant change in 1 to 7 days. It's like, unfortunately, that's not how physiologically or biologically it works.
Yeah. That's what my program, the holistic method, that's in the manual and workbook I produced on Amazon, but also what I'm doing locally and then online, is phase 1 is 5 days, and phase 2 is 21 days. Then the last bit is phase 3 is that transition period, maintenance. And I think learning how to implement that into athletes, into endurance athletes, triathletes, is to, like you said, how do you eat before you work out? And everybody's different, and we're all bio individuals, so it's really hard to say. But I just want to throw in what Dr. Jason Fung found from fasting and exercise. His points that he found is from teaching your body from fasting and building that up, your ability to burn fat, is you can train harder due to increased adrenaline. You recover from a workout and build muscle faster due to increased growth hormone, as you said. And then you'll burn more fat due to increased fatty acid oxidation, which you'll have more ketone production. So basically you can train harder, build muscle, burn fat by eating less. And
absolutely.
I actually, the last month or so, I kind of shifted. So my work schedule's weird. And Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I have clients and I swim and I jog walk with a client. I'll lift weights in the morning, but I don't eat until a meal. I'm just trying to do one main meal, and I don't eat till I go home. Say it's 4:30, 5 o'clock at night, and I start at 5:30 in the morning. But if I could have a kitchen in my fitness studio, I'd like to have bone broth throughout the day, and I'd use Dr. Axe, his ancient nutrition keto shakes, which they're not really keto. They're just higher fat and moderate. There's some protein in there and really low carbs. So I have that with some MCT oil, coffee with the collagen powder. And so my fat coffee, then my keto shakes, ideally bone broth when I remember to heat it up. And then I'm actually fine. And it's funny, just reading his book is kind of what I've been self-experimenting without reading the Guide to Fasting book by Dr. Jason Fung, that I've already been doing that. I found out same thing, like you pass this point that you're not really hungry, and it's so psychological. And if I just have water, I have my shake, and I've adapted over the years though. So this is long time in the making that I can go on and still, be able to work out lower intensity and be okay, and then have a shake or something when I feel like I get hungry. But I think it's beneficial to do a fast like that. Even, he even has a fast, still counts as bone broth, and you can have your fat coffee, you can still be in a fasted state. And so you're not just drinking water with lemon slices all day. It is like a bone broth fast, or you can have the fats, and then you still can be in a fasted state.
Yeah. But
I find that you have to be careful when you're eating a meal that you don't just I can binge and go all out and just go, I did so good all day, I can eat whatever I want. I think that is where the shift is. Even if you're fasting, intermittent fasting, that and you worked out, same mentality. Oh, I just worked out. I went for a 2-hour run. I can eat whatever I want. So you wonder why so many athletes you see at races are not actually that lean because they overeat because, reward, eat food. So exactly. I think fasting is the same little trick. You have to be careful that you don't just go for a huge binge meal for that one meal that you're having if you're doing a 1 meal a day and then fasting the rest of the day.
Oh my gosh, you brought up just so many key points. I had to write them down because I wanted to just say, on top of what you were saying, because, I'll kind of work my way backwards. But you brought up such a great point about when you're fasting, let's say you're doing the intermittent fast, right? And you are eating, you're scheduling your meals in this 8-hour time frame. That 8-hour time frame doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to have huge meals because you're worried about getting all your calories in that day. I say that keep those 8 hours as normal as possible. Nothing too extreme, right? It's just keeping meals decent size, find what works for you. Again, it's very individual in terms of how your blood sugar responds to being with or without food for an X period of time. Sounds like you're really good at, being without necessarily a large meal for an extended period of time. But what I find sometimes my clients will report back to me is that when they do an intermittent fasting day, some love it and they do it all the time, and others feel hungry the next day. And one of the feedback that I have is that the more you do intermittent fasting, the more you're going to become a more efficient metabolizer. And so you may feel hungry at first, the first few times that you do it, but then your body's going to adapt. Yeah. But the key is consistency, as with anything. The key is consistency in order to achieve sustainability. And so when you are consistent about including, intermittent fasting as part of your regular day-to-day routine, or whether you do it a few times a week, however many times you want to do it, your body will adapt and your body will become a better responder. Because as humans are built to adapt, and that's what we're really great at doing. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that, kind of going back to what we said in the beginning, that fasting is completely different as we knew it before, because fasting is no longer, lemon slices and water. That's kind of, I feel like it's almost old school fasting. Right? I think a more efficient way to fast is to what you're talking about is, collagen and bone broth, and giving your body the building blocks to repair while you're fasting, and giving body the building blocks to heal the gut and repair the muscles, so that you get out of the fasting stage feeling better than when you're eating just how you regularly eat.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And reminders too. And I love the analogy that Dr. Jason Fung has in this book is training your body to burn fat is like going to the refrigerator is super easy just to refuel. So your liver glycogen and your muscle glycogen. So say if you keep depleting the liver and then you go eat, you refill it, you deplete it. Well, to get to the fat, you have to walk out to the garage and go to the freezer that's in the garage. It's a little more work to get to that fat. So you have to deplete. You don't start going to the garage to the freezer until you have nothing else in your fridge to eat. So you're like, I got to go a little further. I need to go walk out to the freezer and get something in there and make it. So he used that in his book, explaining how getting to your fat stores and training your fat to break down and through your liver and use that fuel for energy and for brain health, I think is a great way to think of it. Okay, the refrigerator or the freezer, which is easier? Yes, I can just keep eating and then, be on that blood sugar roller coaster, eat that 6-meal a day. I'm like, I'm going to need to look at where that even came from, because I started thinking of that years ago too, when I started thinking of fasting and going, okay, if I'm supposed to eat 3 meals a day and snack, how am I ever going to lose weight? With that many meals to keep your metabolism revved up, you have to stop and think outside of the box. Does this make sense to me? Does this work for my body? And is this doing anything? Because until you do that, you don't get off that hamster wheel. You got to stop reading and believing everything the guidelines tell you and start working on your own body.
Yes. So this is kind of a great segue into when is fasting who's a great candidate for intermittent fasting and who may not do well on it or shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
And I'll give a little an example of the kind of clients that I see, or the kind of clients who I see, and how we have to ease into intermittent fasting. And so definitely, if you're, here's a little disclaimer that, like, if you're pregnant or nursing, fasting is out of the question. Don't consider this until you're past those stages. I know that I work with, again, because I specialize in women's health, and I am seeing a lot of pregnant mamas or postpartum mamas who are so excited and eager to lose weight. And I just have to say, you have to be really patient in this process and wait, because, you and your baby are your number one priority, and you don't want to consider doing that until you're, past that stage. Type 1 diabetics, definitely, this is not a great idea, but talk to your provider about it if it's appropriate for you. And we kind of already talked briefly about type 2 diabetes and how it can be really helpful. But again, always talk to your healthcare provider before doing any sort of dietary change, if you have any underlying conditions or issues. But a lot of the clients that I see, especially women are very busy professionals who are staying up until 1 o'clock in the morning trying to finish up projects, answer emails. Their bosses will email them at the end of the night, in the middle of the night. They get up at 5 a.m. to do their HIIT workout. They're training during the week for the races that are happening during the summer and springtime. They're also moms. So that means that after their workout, they come back, wake up their kids, get them ready for school, go to work. Mm-hmm. And this is where we're talking about carb metabolizers versus fat metabolizers, because they are hungry during the day. And they're hungry during the day because if we take a look at their cortisol levels, if we do a 4-point cortisol curve, we'll see that their either cortisol is through the roof, or it's flatlining, or it's reverse, where it's lower in the morning and then high at night. And this is where I'm saying how fasting may not be appropriate at that time, because they are having, with their schedule, given the intensity of their schedule, given that they are pumping out so much cortisol throughout the day, depleting their adrenal glands, that we have to focus on not taking food out, but actually supporting their blood sugar, just getting their blood sugar stabilized throughout the day first, getting their adrenal glands healthy, and then talking about intermittent fasting, because it can actually be helpful in the long run, given their schedule. It can actually be very helpful in the long run in regulating their mood and their hormones and everything else. However, initially, we got to take care of the basics, and that's regulating blood sugar, decreasing inflammation, and then getting their adrenal glands healthy.
Yes, perfect way. We're just out of time, so it's a great way. So that's kind of what I talked about in Life is Not a Race, my personal story that's kind of why I shared the, riding the bike without eating, because you look at all this stuff and how we are so, what Brad Kern said, AAA personalities that we're just going. And, this whole nother topic of just people emailing each other at 11 o'clock at night when they're working a salaried job. Like, you're not getting paid to not work, to answer emails after hours. Just stick it to the office time. So we got to start working on reducing the stressors and setting some boundaries in our life work, which I keep seeing all the time. So if you want to help the HPA axis or adrenal issue, I think we need to work on our lifestyle habits, because they're just getting worse, not better. So thanks for pointing out that stuff. It's so important. I think, everyone's into fasting and ketosis, and it depends on you and your body and your condition right now, your health. So before you just jump in and experiment, I would see a nutritional therapy practitioner or a trained naturopath as yourself and get help figuring out what's going on first before you start just throwing out different supplements and trying different programs.
Before you start Googling things.
Yeah, I know, which I did too. That might work. So thank you. Where can people find you? Share your website, find your programs and coaching online.
Yeah, so my website is proactivehealthnd.com, and you can find a lot of useful information just about my programs and services and the best way to contact me. And then I'm frequently on my Facebook page, which is Proactive Health ND, and also my Instagram, where I provide a lot of useful daily tips for optimal health, and that's Dr. Elena Zinkoff.
And lovely videos you can watch her do as well.
Oh, yeah.
Very educational.
I try to make it fun.
Yeah, that's good. Love it. So thank you for coming on again. And if you guys have questions for either of us, just go to our Facebook page for the podcast called The Whole Athlete Podcast. You can ask either of us questions, and we can do a follow-up podcast to have a Q&A session because I think these are big topics, and I think a lot of people are curious about fasting and ketosis and endurance athletes and adrenal fatigue, which I just read this thing, this guy saying it's always said adrenal fatigue does not exist because technically it is HPA axis dysregulation or dysfunction.
Right.
And I told the guy, I said, it's just easier to say adrenal fatigue. So if you really know, it's not just your adrenals, it's the signaling from the hypothalamus pituitary gland. It's too difficult.
The Trinity.
Yeah. It's like my infrared therapy treatment room. I'm calling it Fred. I'm like, just too much for it. So just go see Fred. My infrared therapy is Fred. So adrenal fatigue really means HPA axis. So stick with us and you'll figure it out.
Perfect. Love it.
Good. All right. Well, thank you. And let us know if you have any questions and feedback. And if you could do a review on iTunes so we can get more information out to more listeners. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.